Economist Tyler Cowen believes that the economy of the future will be increasingly of the mind, ordering the mind's contents in new and unique ways. In some ways, Cowen believes we have much to learn from autistics. He explores those and other ideas in his new book, Create Your Own Economy: The Path to Prosperity in a Disordered World. He spoke at the Cato Institute August 4th, 2009. This is a portion of his talk.
It's a cognitive strength of autism that many or perhaps all autistics are very good at ordering, classifying, arranging information in preferred areas of interest, and then pursuing knowledge in these areas with a kind of extreme or intense focus. A lot of what the book does is tie together these two areas, information technology and human neurodiversity, by showing in essence what we're trying to do with the web is to mimic some of the cognitive strengths of autistic people. But if we're not autistics ourselves, what we have to do is use technology to help us in this endeavor. So like a big picture summary of the book might be something like, yes, in some ways we are becoming more autistic, but this is actually a good thing, not a bad thing. We're not becoming more autistic in the genetic sense, but we're achieving capabilities that are, as individuals, more like those which autistic people have. Part of the book presents what I would consider to be a revisionist portrait of autism. In the 1960s, it was commonly the view that autistic people, or most of them, were mentally retarded. Over the last 20 years, there's been more and more research showing the cognitive advantages of autistics, recognizing they often have very difficult life problems. But when autistics are given tests for pattern recognition, information collecting, noticing small details, detecting changes in musical pitch, certain kinds of memory, if you give them some problems in experimental economics and all these areas, on average, actually it seems that autistics do better. So there's this general sense of humanity having this great diversity of cognitive profiles, which we call neurodiversity. And the vision of the book, the moral vision of the book, is about the power of the individual human being to take modernity and become more like himself or herself, to become more authentic, to become more individual, to become more diverse. And it's really a message from Adam Smith that's driving a lot of themes in the book. Smith wrote that division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. I think you can also argue that the power of human neurodiversity is limited by the extent of the market. And as we move into contemporary society, people who are in some ways different, whether neurologically or otherwise, they can achieve greater power, greater opportunities, and that we all ought to take this revisionist view, which I would, for instance, also apply to what's called ADD or ADHD, so-called attention deficit disorder. I'm arguing ADD, we shouldn't call it disorder. Autism, we shouldn't call it disorder. We should recognize them as cognitive profiles which have advantages and disadvantages. And in some individuals, the social advantages may outweigh the disadvantages or vice versa. So it's very much a revisionist view of creativity and cognition and how it relates with economic growth and modernity, which is overall a very optimistic picture not only of information technology, but of this notion of the future of human neurodiversity. That's my overview of the book in big picture terms. What I'd like to talk about in my remaining time are just some of the arguments in the book about politics. There's a chapter called Autistic Politics, which is a deliberately jarring title, but I chose it to be jarring on purpose. And one of the points I make is that when it comes to politics, there are aspects of the autistic cognitive profile that I feel would greatly improve politics, and that we could learn a lot from this cognitive profile. Just to summarize what I think those aspects are, autistics, in my view, and there's some evidence behind this, they're less likely to think in terms of us versus them. They're less likely to encode false memories. They're less likely to think in terms of simple stereotypical narratives. They're more likely to remember particular individual facts when shown a narrative, less likely to use narratives to oversimplify. And when it comes to economic experiments, they're less likely to be fooled by framing or endowment effects, which means, I think more broadly, the notion that simply because something is theirs, or maybe that a point of view of theirs, it doesn't, for that reason alone, make it more valuable. I also view autistics and neurodiverse people more generally as kind of natural cosmopolitans, that if an autistic person grows up being very different, feeling very different in the schoolyard, And then that same autistic person is, say, 27 years old and being asked to believe that the real differences across human beings are defined by what nation you belong to. I believe this is a very unnatural thought for most autistic people, that the idea that there's a common humanity, which autistics sometimes are accused or defined of not belonging to, is a very powerful notion in what I would call autistic thought. And this notion of the common humanity is a very cosmopolitan one. So my vision of an autistic politics, it's not any particular political point of view, but I think it would embody these features of being extremely cosmopolitan, of more interested in being objective, not seeing everything in us versus them terms, not being so preoccupied with the notion of revenge, and really thinking in some pretty fundamentally different ways about what politics is. I think the way the battle lines are drawn in the world we live in, the battle lines typically fall in terms of what are your conclusions. Like, are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Are you a Libertarian? Are you a Socialist? And this, the more I think about it, this strikes me as extremely odd. Why should the battle lines be drawn in terms of conclusions? Another way of drawing the battle lines would be, say, in terms of how people think. So if I take someone like Matt, who's one of the commenters, I read Matt's blog all the time. Matt, I think, would agree that he and I disagree on a lot of issues. Not on everything, but we disagree a lot. Like, we disagree every day. We sort of write back and forth to each other and to others, and even if we don't call each other by name, we're like disagreeing in public every day. But at the same time, when I read Matt, I have this feeling like if I were a progressive, this is the argument I would make. I feel that way when I read Matt. There's other writers, like when I read Paul Krugman, I don't feel that way. I don't think if I were a progressive, I would argue like Paul Krugman. So there's this method of thinking in common. So there's the question, like, should I be emotionally, intellectually, whatever, more allied to people with whom I share conclusions or with whom I share a certain method of thinking? And when I disagree with Matt, which is frequent, I feel I can always figure out very quickly where we disagree. There's something like about the framework that we have in common. And that to me seems like a powerful commonality. So in general, I'm interested in getting people to explore or re-explore what are our true commonalities with other people. We should rethink these commonalities in terms other than us versus them. I feel myself actually not very attached to a lot of libertarians. I think they think very differently than I do. So when Brink said maybe I'm a small L libertarian, maybe I'm a very small L, like you're wondering what font, what typeface. Can we get that L down to the quantum level? I don't know. But I guess I would say the people I feel like allied with are people who think in particular ways. And that to me, as I get older, is becoming a more important distinction. So like how big L a libertarian I am isn't what I think about so much these days. It's like, how can we develop better methods for thinking? And when I write Marginal Revolution, for me, it's not fundamentally about conclusions. Obviously, I'll tell people what I think, but it's about trying to develop or illustrate or myself learn some dialogic form of thinking which is in some way fundamentally open, which I think is what the blogosphere is, and trying to learn from that myself. And that, to me, over time, has become a powerful vision. And emotionally, in a lot of ways, it's more important to me than any particular set of policy conclusions.
Tyler Cowen is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. He is a professor of economics at George Mason University. His new book is Create Your Own Economy: The Path to Prosperity in a Disordered World. You can watch the forum for the book at cato.org.